Hi, this video is about developing smooth and easy string crossings. So there's a PDF that is attached here that has all these exercises. There's some of them that are written out in music and some of them that are described. I am going to go through all those because I think they're really hard to understand when you're just reading them, but those are for your reference for practicing. So the first thing I want to talk about is your wrist, because this is what we're going to be using for crossing strings. Your wrist is a hinge, and it's responsible for elevation changes. When I use my wrist, my hand, my fingers specifically with that are holding the bow, go up or down. So this is how we're going to be using the wrist today in this idea of the wrist is a hinge. And you'll notice when I'm doing this, my wrist isn't actually moving, right? My wrist is just hinging, but my fingers are moving and my hand is moving, and so that's what we're going to talk about. Silent exercise number 1 takes this technique and uses it without pulling the bow, just silently on the cello. You're going to want to do all of these exercises in the upper half, so starting maybe around the middle. Don't try them in the lower half quite yet. It's actually harder to change strings in the lower half, and yes, obviously we change strings lots of times in the lower half, but this is an easier technique to develop when you're working just with the upper half. So you put your bow on the string, on the D string, and your arm is on your D string level, so it's a little high, possibly. I'm going to drop my fingers down to the G string by hinging down. So I'm going to drop that way using my wrist as a hinge. My bow has tilted to the G string and it looks weird. My stick is turned away from me, which is like the wrong way, and I'm playing on the outer edge of the hair, which is also the wrong way, and that's how this works. So then I'm going to lift my fingers. I'm thinking of the direction that my fingers are going. I'm going to lift my fingers up by doing this hinge, and my bow will go back to the D string. I'm letting my bow tilt as I'm moving my wrist. So I tilt down to the G, and I lift back up to the D. And I'm going to do that a lot of times. I'll try it on different strings. When I go to the A string, I need to lift my whole arm up. You can practice getting yourself on a good A string angle. You notice I pushed my hand forward when I went to the A string. Same idea. It's going to feel like it's tilting to the wrong side of the bow, and that is how this works. Okay, when you get good at that, you can do it for a while on lots of different strings. When you get good at that, then you're ready to do literally the same exercise, but pulling your bow. So one of the things that happens when I'm in the upper half is I'm using my arm this way. So my elbow is opening to pull the bow sideways. So the sideways motion has nothing to do with the wrist. It's all about that part of the arm. The up and down motion is all about the wrist. So I'm trying not to be lifting my entire arm back and forth across the strings, which you can see is a lot of motion, and it's a lot of energy that I'm using to lift this whole arm. This is a much simpler and lighter motion. Okay, so I'm going to start again on the D string. This is exercise number 2. And this is written out in music, actually. And you can do this a million times at whatever tempo you need to. And you might need to stop. So you might pull your D string note. And then you say, oh boy, I don't even remember what to do now. I'm going to look at the instructions. It says, drop your fingers down. There's my G string. And then what do? I lift my fingers up. If you're this slow, that's great. That's where you are. Fingers down, fingers up. If you get the hang of it, then you'll start doing it smoother. And you can, of course, do it on all these combinations of strings. I didn't write down G and C. You're welcome to do it as well on G and C. And get to a point where you feel like you can do that smoothly without panicking about which direction your fingers are going. It may help to do even some kind of in the air things where you're thinking high string, low string, high string, low string, where you're trying to kind of internalize what that motion is, high string, low string. Then number 3 is the opposite direction, and this can be disorienting because you've kind of got the balance of starting down bow on your upper string. Now you're going to start down bow on your lower string. And what's going to happen here is if you start with your arm on that level, you're going to lift up your fingers and you're going to feel like, whoa, my arm's not high enough, because it's not. The rule for string crossings is your arm needs to be on the level of the higher of the strings. So you have two options. You can either remember when you start on a lower string to lift your elbow up, get your arm so it looks a little high for the G string, but it's going to be right when I lift up my fingers for the D, and then I'm going to leave it there. Your other option, if you forget to lift your arm when you start, or you're in the middle of a piece of music where it wouldn't be natural to have your arm up, is let your arm be low when you start, and as you go to the D string, along with the wrist hinge, lift your arm. That's a little bit more complicated, but that's more how we use it in an actual piece of music. So then you're going to work on this combo. Same exact technique, but it's a little turned around, so you may have to kind of think about it. Then, that was exercise number 3. Exercises number 4 and 5 are about going faster. So exercise number 4, you don't do it if you're still struggling with 2 and 3. And you may have to stay on exercises 2 and 3 for a couple of weeks till you get really good at doing this, particularly if it's a totally new idea for you. If you felt pretty good about exercises 2 and 3 and you could do them smoothly and transition from one to the other without too much trouble, then you can start going faster. And when I go faster, what happens is I use less motion. And the reason I'm using less motion is because I'm keeping my bow really close to both strings. And if I have that level of control, I can look and see, a tiny space between the string and the bow as I'm switching back and forth. And obviously that's an advantage, to be able to have that control of keeping your bow really close to both strings. You don't have to move your wrist very much. Those are intended to be smooth exercises. So don't go to the faster exercises of number 4 if you're still having trouble being smooth when you're doing exercises 2 and 3. Then exercise 5 adds the fingers. And again, if you're having a good amount of coordination, if it feels pretty good what you're doing, great, add some fingers. So the rule when we have fingers in string crossings is we want to hold them down as much as possible. And these exercises give you just a couple basic finger shapes. Etc. You'll notice I've got all 4 fingers down when I'm at my 4th finger. I'm trying not to do this because we're not vibrating here. We don't need to let go of fingers. This is a better finger technique, is holding all your fingers down. So if you're not someone who's used to holding all your fingers down, you could use this exercise as a way to reinforce that idea of when your 4th finger's down, all your fingers are down. Holding your fingers down becomes more complicated when you do the next set of exercises. It's the 3rd line of exercise 5. When you're playing fingers on the D string and crossing to the A. Again, try to hold your fingers, all of them, down when you get to your 4th finger, but you're probably going to have to lift up here in the left wrist. I roll my thumb a little bit to the outside because I do want to be really on my fingertips here. So that idea of learning how to clear the higher string. This is not the position I would have my hand and arm in just to play normally on my D string, but I'm going to hit the A string if I do that. So there's a certain amount of adjusting that we have to do. It may not be possible for you, and if it's not, that's okay. Just do it as best as you can. And so then the final thing that we're doing in this video is adding slurs. There's a couple of different slurring options in the exercises below. You may find it easier to add slurs because it may be a little easier to get a smooth sound, or you may find it a lot more difficult, and some slurs are harder than others. It's obviously going to be the same technique. I'm starting on the A string and dropping down. I'm still trying to stay in the middle to upper half. And the closer I can keep my bow to each string, the smaller my wrist motion will be. You can try more slurs. You can try fewer slurs like happen in the very bottom exercise. One thing that you'll discover is once you've gotten going on slurs, and they feel pretty easy, it can be really hard to turn it around and go the other direction. And it's especially also difficult when you hit the change to the up bow, so that as I'm going for slurs, right here, I want to make sure I'm not using my arm, wrist. So you may have to pay special attention to that because it's really often the case that people haul their arm up when they're changing strings. Remember, your arm is in charge of sideways and your wrist is in charge of up and down. So if the 4-note slurs feel pretty good, try the 2s. And again, there's a different coordination here. And so if you want to get fancier, you can combine these. I didn't write out the exercises in a more combined way, but you can switch back and forth in the patterning, switch back and forth in the slurs, see if you can make up your own version of these. Okay, so this may take you a while, or you may already be really good at it, but good luck and keep practicing.